Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Kichi Miyazawa felt like throwing up. His chest was tightening. He could feel his heart racing through his veins, ready to pop any second. I mean, how else are you supposed to feel when you're apologizing to an entire nation for something you feel so strongly responsible for, but happened way before you were even born? We, Japanese, should first and foremost recall the tragic events in which Japanese action inflicted pain and suffering upon your people. We should never forget our remorse over this. As the Prime Minister of Japan, I would like to declare my remorse and apologize to the people of the Republic of Korea. I guess it makes sense. It took them nearly, 47 years to finally admit it? The horrific crimes that the Japanese imperialism committed? But let's be real for a second. It takes more than I'm sorry when you're apologizing to torturing nearly 200,000 women for a decade and then coining them as a term of an Ianfu, or as we know, comfort woman. Hi friends, welcome to Sunday Steps with Safa. Today we will be discussing Comfort Women, a government-sponsored trafficking exploitation during a war that stripped away any basic human and civil rights. Today I will be mainly discussing a story of a Korean survivor. I did want to talk more about the Japanese imperialism, but it was a lot, so I figured I'll split it into 3 different videos. Today we will be talking about Comfort Women. In the next video I will be discussing the Nanjing massacres, and then the one after that will be on Unit 731. Now before we begin, I do want to make it very clear that Japan today is not represented by its past. The people work actively to improve international relations and hold their government accountable, as all of us should. Japan itself is filled with rich culture and art and food and generous and respectable people. This video is solely for educational purposes. And I also want to let you all know that today's video will be discussing on essay of young women and girls, as well as psychological torturing and physical and mental torturing, and victim blaming. If any of these topics sounds unhealthy for you to hear right now, then please exit out and I will see you in the next one. And with that being said, let's begin. Okay, so the drink of the day is Hawaii. Because if we're celebrating Korean history, we might as well try some Korean drinks. And I will be honest, I went down the whole rabbit hole on TikTok what Hawaii was, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. It has hydrating properties that keep you fresh during the summer heat. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but like my face feels super oily right now. And it's mainly because essential oil isn't working right now. And the heat out there is insane. If I pop these windows open, we'll hear every single noise that's going out there. So we're not doing that. Instead, what we're doing is we're drinking Hawaii. Hawaii is made with, the one that I made is with ice, blackberries, watermelon, dragon fruit, and milk and Sprite. Because Hawaii is supposed to use carbonated drinks as well as milk, and watermelon is the key ingredients. You can also put like edible flowers and honey, but I stuck to like the most basic recipe I could find online. Correct me if I made it wrong, but I also found it pretty cool because like we make dulsora in my culture, and I made a video a few weeks back about it, and dulsora is pretty popular during the summer because of the heat. So I was like, oh, that's so cool, because it's good to see like other cultures doing something similar that my culture does, you know. And just so you guys can see an example of how hot this heat is, if you're watching the video, I'm pretty sure I posted a video of me putting a bowl of ice into the bowl that I'm drinking out of, and look at that. It's melting, it's dripping, and it's only been 15 minutes. I am dying right now. But it's okay, because we've got Hawaii. It's going to hydrate us, and we're going to continue this, right? Also, I can't resist but eat the watermelons that I cut up because look how cute these are. Look at this. You don't think that's the cutest thing I've ever done? I use a cookie cutter. So I have a hypothetical question. I mean, it's more of a question that had been trending on TikTok for a while. If you were stranded in some woods and you had to choose between two paths, one in which a bear was wandering and the other in which a man was wandering, which one would you pick? I would pick the bear, 100%. Because, one, I know that's the bear's natural habit. I chose to go in there. But two, if there's a man wandering, I don't know what his intentions are, right? Because we as women, we live by a certain set of unspoken rules. Like checking the back seat of your car before getting in and then locking the doors as soon as you do. Or never accept food and drinks from strangers. Cross the street when walking past a large group of men. And never ever walk alone at night. But what's the rule for walking alone in broad daylight? Because Lee Young-soo, she was 16 years old, and she loved braiding her friends' hairs, skipping rocks, going to the day market and getting new pins. And this particular autumn day was no different than the others. The only problem is it was 1944. The Republic of Korea had been under the occupation of imperialistic Japan since 1910. Majority of Asia was also under Japanese regime since 1894. So people were no strangers to having military presence on their streets because Japan had proven from time and time again that they're stronger in numbers. And while she was skipping on her way home, Young-soo felt the presence of a man wearing an olive green military uniform just following her. And her flight and fight kicked in. She ran from her house, locked her doors, closed the windows, and hoped that he would leave. And he did. Japan in 1931 had everything it needed. Gold mines, land, and the fulfillment of the 5 basic needs of food, water, shelter, sleep, and clothes. But there was one thing that it really lacked, and that was the comfort it could provide its soldiers. Kicking a ball around the courtyard wasn't exactly striking their interest anymore. They were craving something more to boost their morale, something to satisfy their primal needs. So the Japanese government wanted to create a, quote, safe way of doing this without the amount of excessive diseases that were being spread among their troops, among the villagers that they were staying with. And honestly, the amount of essays these soldiers were doing with the villagers was starting to create a hostile environment. And for that, they came up with their best solution, a service station, where men could come during their duty and, I'm paraphrasing this, but relieve their stress. The problem is there weren't enough people to provide these services. Well, not enough women. So the military would lure women or young girls with the promise of a job. These jobs could be of kitchen workers, factory workers, laundriers, or nurses even. The girl would show up for the job, be beaten, abducted, and then forced to become a servicewoman in one of these makeshift motels. And nothing, absolutely nothing is more terrifying than waking up in a strange room surrounded by people that you've never met. And what's worse is that the last thing you remember is being snatched from your house in the middle of the night, dragged onto a train, beaten and kicked for hours, passing out, and then being stoned onto a ship. The man had returned later that night with another young girl to lure Young-soo out of her home, and Young-soo was forced onto a train where she was kidnapped and beaten along with 4 other girls, the young girl that lured her out being one of them. They would travel from Daegu, South Korea to Onju in Northern Korea, and from there they would be stowed onto a ship to travel to the kamikaze unit in Taiwan. Have you ever had a really bad nightmare? And do you remember waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in your sweat, sobbing, and then feeling relieved at the same time that it wasn't true? But then in the same breath, you can't really shake off the uneasiness from it. For these five young girls, this nightmare was real, and it was only going to get worse from here. Because on that ship were the five girls, and surrounded by them were 300 male soldiers. This year, Youngsu's turning 95. She is one of the 240 survivors out of the 200,000, and only one of the 9 who are still alive today, fighting for justice. You know, there are certain sounds a person can never forget. Like, for me, most of them are before I lost my hearing, so such as the washing machines and the laundromat, or my grandmother's soothing voice, the heavy thunder, or even the waves crashing against rocks on a beach. And for Youngsu, it was the wailing of the 5 young girls in the middle of the night, begging for mercy. Because for days, the girls were locked up in a cold, dimly lit storage room. Once a day, a soldier would walk in, essay a young girl, and if she screamed or she cried, or one of her other 4 sisters basically tried to rescue her or to stop them, they would all get beaten up to the point that they were black and blue and still be essayed. And at times there would be multiple soldiers in the room with one girl, or forcing multiple girls with multiple soldiers. And then this would happen for at least 20 times a day, for God knows how long. And then when Youngsu finally got off the boat, she would be brought into this beautiful Sirian, which is a traditional Chinese home. It's a wide open floor. Youngsu's feet would step upon the tatami mat, and she would feel so relaxed, so relieved. And she would have her own little sleeping space, well, it was makeshift sleeping space that was divided by 5 curtains, well, blankets made as curtains, and she would have her own tiny space. It was almost a type of solitude that she was seeking, but unfortunately was met with a much worse fate. The Sunyan itself was managed by 10 beautiful women who were always wearing their best silk kimonos, their cheeks always done with blush, and their hair always tidy and up. One of the women had a soft spot for Youngsu, and so one day she shoved Youngsu into her closet, put her finger up to her lips, and said, "Stay quiet, stay here, I'll be back." But then was immediately yanked back by a soldier who caught her trying to protect and save Youngsu. And he said, "Bring me this one." The imperial government's intention was to make these hotels as humane as possible. But how can you really make holding someone against their own will humane? You know what I mean? Each day, a different unit would be assigned to a specific, hotel. And then they could only visit from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then would be only servicing one man at a time with one woman at a time. Or I can't even say woman, it's girls. And then the fee would be for an hour only, 2 yen, that had to be paid up front. Every Monday and Friday, the woman would be tested for STD. The woman, not the man. The government stated that they would provide all kind of medical services to the women, making sure that I know I keep saying women, it's not women, it's girls. Most of these girls were between the ages 12 to 16. The government also warned their soldiers of punishment if they ever abused or broke the rules or hurt any of the girls or even the women that were managing the hotels. And then when this woman helped Youngsu up and had her wash up, did her hair, gave her her best silk kimono, She said, "If you refuse, they will kill you and they will kill me." And then she told Young-soo to go to her makeshift room. The soldier was already sitting on the floor, half naked, and drinking tea, and he waved at Young-soo to come over. Young-soo was mortified and turned around and ran, and this only pissed the soldier off more. He got up, threw his hot tea at the woman, chased after Young-soo, picked her up, took her into the back, locked her into one of the rooms with him, and he kicked her down to the floor and started to beat her. He beat her several times, a few times with a stick, tied her up at the wrists with a rope, electrically shocked her. Now, I don't have any information of what he was using as far as to electrically shock her, but that thought itself is horrifying. And then when she still refused to give in, he would kick her down to her knees, pull out a knife, hold it towards her throat, and then brutally assault her for 3 hours straight. When he was finally done, he threw 2 yen at the woman that was standing outside the door and left Young-soo bleeding out on the floor, severely injured down below. I'm honestly glad that Young-soo lived to tell her story, because many women, unfortunately, would not make it past their time as a nympho. They would die from contracting diseases, miscarriages with no medical attention, forced abortions. Even soldiers would give them pills to abort their unborn child, or even at some point soldiers would give them pills before even doing anything with them. It was basically like these women were just a plaything for these soldiers. These girls were just playthings for these soldiers. There would be much worse cases where women would be assaulted by multiple men and left bleeding out, and then either medical censors didn't exist in the camps or they just didn't care, and then the girls would end up getting infected. And if any of the girls tried to help the injured girl get cleaned up, they themselves would be beaten up to the point that they were black and blue too, or they would be stabbed for even attempting to escape, or the soldiers call it escaping, because they're trying to help somebody else. You know what I mean? And to top it off, the girls were responsible of doing the chores around the unit, such as, cleaning and laundry and cooking. It didn't matter if you were injured or not. You had to do your chores. And if someone else tried to do your chores for you, they would get punished and you would get punished. And if you didn't do your chores, you would still get punished. So, there was no winning for them. And then some of the girls would end up giving birth, and their children would become a plaything for the soldiers as well. They would be raised in captivity with the women themselves. If you were a girl born into the captivity, your fate was already decided. You would be the next nympho as soon as you hit the age limit for the soldiers. And so the soldiers would take the children of the mothers to torture them even farther. In one instance where a soldier basically took a woman's son, made him stand outside in the hot sourcing sun with no shoes on, and if the kid even so knelt down to the ground or cried, the soldier would shoot at his feet. And then essentially the mother would just be forced to watch her son suffer in agony. And it wasn't like she could do anything to save him. Many of the victims that passed away would be carried out by their fellow girls and placed upon other deceased women in the back of the scene. They were not allowed to be given proper burials due to their culture and tradition rights, which is incredibly disrespectful. Because realistically, if you can't treat a person humanely while they're alive, you should still at least try to respect the dead. Because in Korean families that practice, there's a beautiful tradition called Jesa. It's a ceremony that honors their deceased at least once in a year. In these ceremonies, the family members set up an altar with a written prayer in the front, candles on both sides, and food laid out in the middle. So you've got rice, fresh fruit, and meat facing the west, And then you've got soup, fish, and red fruit facing the west. And for this tradition, the elder son would essentially be the first one to pour some wine for the family, and then so on the next male descendant, and then one after that. And then eventually the eldest male descendant would stick a spoon into the bowl of rice. But because a lot of Korean families were unsure if their daughters were deceased, they would hold off on the ceremonies until they got a confirmation, or at least in hopes that their daughters were still alive. And just like a ghost, Young-soo slowly walked up to her house. She was covered head to toe in white powder, her hands and her knees bleeding. Her appa took one look at her and fainted. Her oma calmly gave her younger brother some money and said, "Get some tofu. This is just a day. The dead has come to eat." Young-soo ran up to her mom and hugged her tightly, and her oma felt shivers down her body. It started to hit Young-soo, begging her, asking for forgiveness, telling the ghosts to leave them. And Young-soo fell to the ground, sobbing and gasping and sobbing, "I'm home, Oma. I'm home." And after 3 long years, Young-soo was finally reunited with her family. The horrific ordeal that Young-soo went through is only a scale of what we know. Because 240 survivors out of 200,000, that barely tells us anything. There could have been much worse situations that we don't know of. And in 2015, Japanese government finally offered 1 billion yen, which is about $6 million US, as an apology to the Republic of Korea. Note, to Korea, not to the victims, to the nation. This sparked an outrage among the South Korean and the North Korean, but also for other countries throughout the world. Because how is a life worth only 1 billion yen? 6 million US? That's nothing compared to what these women went through. So naturally, this pissed some people off. I mean, it's infuriating. This is like the final stab, the final blow. Because here's the thing, comfort stations officially started in 1932, way before World War II even began. And it wasn't until 1944, almost 50 years after the war had ended, that Japan finally issued an apology. And the only reason why they did this was because of the public. Japanese citizens were pressuring Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa that it was their own government, that was their own people. And that caused the deaths of thousands and thousands of people. And to add further to the insult, Miyazawa apologized to the nation of Korea in 1992, and the Japanese government was not happy with this, and they refuted it at him, saying that we never said that, we never said sorry, so this is not true. The chief cabinet secretary, Yuri Kono, denied any involvement of Japan with the comfort woman. He basically victim blamed that the entire continent of Asia was involved, and that these victims are just looking to point fingers at the Japanese government. But we love the public, okay? Because the citizens of Japan, they ripped their government a new one. They came with the receipts. People that had parents that were in the war, or grandparents that were in the war, had actually had ledgers that their ancestors kept. And these ledgers would say the name, date, hotel of who was there, what they did, what woman survived, what woman didn't survive. Like, everything was documented on paper. So now you've got ledgers, medical documents, signatures, paperwork of hotels, owners, government sign-offs from all over the world coming in. And Yuri has no choice but to investigate. So Yuri started a government study, which would take about 19 months to complete. And then finally, in August of 1993, he would release the infamous Kono Statement. In this statement, Japan had officially declared that the suffering of hundreds and thousands of women during the war the Imperial Japan had begun was indeed the fault of their own past. Don't get me wrong, acknowledging your mistakes is a good thing, but writing a statement and not offering people a sincere apology is a very shitty move. So I can understand why many citizens all over the world, especially South Korea, and Young-soo herself, did not want to accept the money that was given to them. They wanted a more sincere apology. Sure, some financial compensation wouldn't hurt, but they wanted a more sincere apology, not a government study. I wanted to add a clip of Young-soo talking on Korea Now, but I'm still getting used to YouTube and their copyright infringements. So instead of posting that clip, I'm just going to describe what happened, and I would definitely encourage everyone to check it out afterwards. But in the video, she's wearing a red traditional top, her cheeks are rosy, looking like the cutest harmony ever, and tells her the story of her experience. Towards the end of the interview, she tightens a scarf and puts a shawl on the Statue of Peace, which is a statue dedicating to remembering the comfort women all over the world, and she wipes her cheeks, pats her back, and sits next to her and says, "I will live until I'm 200 to make the world peaceful." I highly encourage all of you to go watch it because I bawled like a baby. Trust me, it's worth it. And to this day, she marches in the street. Her life mission is to resolve the issue before she passes. And may she live a long, long life so that she can tell future generations that she succeeded. Because she is not a comfort woman. She is Lee Young-soo. And while today we were focused on her story specifically, I do want to acknowledge that there are almost 360,000 to 400,000 victims in total. Many of them returned to their families deceased, and many of them still today have not been recovered. But the surviving lived to tell us the tale. Along with Young-soo's interview, if you're interested, there are more survivors' stories on projectsonyo.com. That is projectsonyo.com. I highly recommend you to read those, and I definitely recommend you to watch Young-soo's interview. But also, if you're more of a TV person, there are movies out there as well called The Last Comfort Woman, which was a 2015 Korean film. It is incredibly graphic-y. It's definitely not suitable for a younger audience. And there's also an episode on the Netflix show called Tomorrow. It is called Spring, and it portrays what it would have looked like for a comfort woman's lifestyle when she was unfortunately forced to be part of the Botels. But there are many victims who still speak about their stories on a daily basis, so I'm sure you can research on YouTube to hear more of their stories to understand. Because the goal is, if we continue to talk about this and continue to hold everybody's governments accountable, my own too, if I have to, we will get the recognition that these women deserve. Again, not women, but girls. They were robbed of their childhood, and I will always call them girls. And if you're an emotional girly like I am, or an emotional person, trust me, Project Sonyo is the best way to go, because you will read stories of survivors from Taiwan, Philippines, South Korea, North Korea, China, and they are very heart-wrenching, because once you read one story, you want to know more about it. And I don't know about you, but I go into a whole deep rabbit hole of Googling everybody, and I'm like, oh my god, this is what happened, that's what happened. And then the next thing you know is I'm in a rabbit hole of a whole nother thing, and it is the most saddest thing I think I've ever read in my life. I cannot imagine the amount of stress they went through, but I am so grateful that they lived to tell us the stories. Let's remind our future generations how harsh the world can be, and that history is never meant to be forgotten. And the next time you come across a Statue of Peace, give it your greetings. And for Young-soo, I hope she gets the resolution that she's looking for. And if not, I hope she lives a long life enough to see it happen. Thank you all for listening. Please leave me any feedback. Let me know what I can do better, what I can't do better. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.